Hi everyone, this is Paean from AstroDinaryImaging.com. So today I'm going to show you my processing workflow from start to end for my panoramas. This includes the pre-processing of the raw files, the stitching phase, and finally the actual final processing of it. So I'm gonna be working on this 48 image panorama that was taken at the Pink Lake of Port Gregory. This was roughly 550 kilometers north of Perth City. So let's get into it. So first of all, I've brought everything into Lightroom and had a look at the raw files. Okay, so as you can see, everything looks pretty dark, and this is just the way I shoot my images. So the settings are up here. Each image was taken at ISO 800, f2.2, and at 20 seconds shutter speed. Everything looks pretty dark, and this is just to use a technology in certain cameras today called ISO invariance, where you can raise the exposure in post without any noise penalties. So raising it by 2 stops would be equivalent to just shooting at ISO 3200 in camera. So you look at, if we zoom in at everything, it's basically the same as shooting it at ISO 3200 by raising it by 2 stops. So anyway, let's reset that. Okay, first up, I want to get the color balance right. That's to me the most important thing. So I'm going to raise everything up by about a stop and a half. I'm going to scroll all the way down, and my favorite color calibration would be camera neutral in this case, because I feel it lightens the image enough, and yeah, I do like it. So to get the color balance right, I normally chuck the vibrance and saturation all the way up and start to adjust the temperature and tints until I get an even mixture of both blue and yellow, and green and magenta. So in this case, about 4200 is what I come to shoot most of the time, or adjust my color balance to. And the same thing for the tint, slide it back and forth till you get an even mixture of greens and magenta. So in this case, I'm going to leave it at 0. All right. Once I'm happy with the color balance, I'll just reset both vibrance and saturation. So this is a very neutral looking image now, and it's a good base point to start with. Next thing I'm going to do is adjust my white point. So I'm going to press the Alt key and slide the white slider all till I see some stars coming up. So in this case, plus 40 looks about right. And I'm going to leave the blacks for now. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is put about a little medium contrast and have a look at it. I think in this case it looks it's too flat. So I'm going to do a strong contrast. I'm going to put a point right in the shadows and raise up the highlights. So that's looking okay now. Next thing I'm going to do is do some lens corrections. So remove the chromatic aberrations and enable the profile corrections. So this looks way too bright on the corners to me. So with this, the lens profiles for this particular lens I'm using, Lightroom seems to overcorrect the vignetting. So I'll turn it down by a little bit to about plus 70. Looks a bit better now. All right. So I normally bump up the clarity by a little bit, and the contrast a little bit more as well. Reduce the highlights by a tad, and I'll leave it at that. So I'm going to sync up these settings throughout all the photos, throughout all the different photos, and yeah, we'll have a look through them. So once everything's synced up, I'm going to just have a quick look through. Everything looks fine. And yeah, that looks about right. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the ground itself. So so there's two parts to the image, of course, the sky itself, the Milky Way, and then the foreground. So you notice that the sky is pretty bright already, but if I'm gonna look at the foreground, it's pretty dark. So what I'm gonna do is raise up the exposure a little bit more in the foreground. So in this case, I'm gonna start with the first image of the foreground. I'm gonna raise it up by a little bit more, maybe another third of a stop. I'm going to sync that through this particular row. And then I'm going to look at the bottom layer, which is even darker. I'm going to lift that up by half a stop instead and sync that through the entire foreground. Alright, so if I look through the images now, so the foreground itself is a bit brighter than the sky, and that's exactly what we want in this case. Alright, so I'm going to select all the photos and export them as a 16-bit TIFF file. I'll put this in my same working folder that I was using. The TIFF files, and the settings I'm using is a TIFF file with a ProPhoto RGB, resolution of 300 pixels per inch, and no sharpening, no watermarks or anything else. So I'm going to let this export now, and we'll come back when it's done. Alright, so now all the raw files have been exported as a 16-bit TIFF, and I'm going to go ahead with the stitching process. So my stitching software of choice is Autopano Giga by a company called Kolor with a K. So in this case, I've shot this panorama with a Giga robotic head. So I'm going to use the Giga plugin in Autopano Giga. Next up, so import the files. I'm just going to go to the exact location. In this case, it was Pink Waters and all the TIFF files here. So you got 48 of them. Open up. The shoot layout, I did rows downwards. So let it go ahead and import everything. And my shoot overlap in this case was 50%. So mind you, each of these TIFF files are now over 100 megabytes big. So this entire panorama is about 5 gigabytes in size. So it's finished importing everything, and it's going to start the stitching process right now. This might take a while. Alright, we're back. As you can see, that Autopano has given the initial projection of this entire panorama, which in this case is actually a 360 photosphere that I've taken. The specs of it, it shows you that it took the exact time it was taken, the date, and the total amount of time that it took to capture this panorama. In this case, it was 18 minutes long. Alright, so I'm going to double click on the projection, and Autopano by default normally puts in a spherical projection, which is used for 360 photospheres. So What I'm going to do now is readjust the panorama to put the areas of interest right in the middle of the photo. Take note of this crosshair in the middle. It gives you the horizontal and vertical lines. So I'm going to line up the horizon exactly with the horizontal line. And that looks about right. Alright, so next up, the spherical projection tends to give a very squished looking Milky Way. And I don't really like the look of it for a static panorama. This is the projection that you'll need if you want to project a photosphere on Facebook or Google Maps. But in this case, we are just going to be working with a static flat panorama. So I'm going to go up to the projection settings, and I'm going to go to the little planet projection with a locked horizon. All right, so give it a moment to project the image. So yeah, mind you, the data sizes that we are working with here are huge. So it's a 5 GB image. And the actual specs of it's 23.9K by 23.9K in this case. So Little Planet tends to give you a square aspect ratio. Just rendering the preview, and it's rendered. I'm going to adjust the scale of it to 2.5 times. So it just makes it a little bit bigger, easier to see. Alright, now I'm going to just readjust the image till I get the exact composition that I like. And that looks about right to me. And next we're going to crop it down to size. So this is just the initial crop. We're going to recrop this in Lightroom again. So this is just the stitching process itself. As you can see, the colors all look a little bit off. This is just due to Autopano Giga not being able to project the Pro Photo RGB color space, which is actually a print color space rather than a screen color space. So that looks all good. Now I'm gonna just do the final check on the control points. And so the main thing is that you don't want any red points like that. That's red there. That means there's no connection points between these two images. Or it could also mean there's a faulty control point. So in this case, number 14 here, that's totally wrong. I'm going to get rid of that one. And number 15 here is totally wrong. I'll get rid of that one as well. And yeah, that looks about right. It looks okay. And I'm going to optimize the entire all the control points again, and see it's gotten rid of that red point there. So this entire image looks like it was stitched without an issue now. I'm going to close the control points selector. And just notice that the horizon is not totally straight. I don't want any of the horizon police to come after me. Shout out to Stephen Humblebee. Alright, that looks about right. And check the crop one last time. Make it a little bit wider. Alright, so I'm quite happy with this projection now. I'm going to start the exporting phase. So it gives you those some specs of the image. This is now a total of 169 megapixels within this crop, and I'm going to export it again as a 16-bit TIFF file at 300 dpi. I'm going to put that in that same working folder that I was working on. In this case, it's the stitch folder. You can call the folders whatever you like. and I'm going to start the rendering process. Now this could take, depending on the size of the image and your computer specs, it could take anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 hours. If you're working with gigapixel images, it's going to take a long time to process, to render out. So anyway, I'm going to leave the video here for now and let it render the image, and I'll come back when it's done. Alright, so this panorama has been rendered, and it took, let's look through the specs. It says it took a total of 12 minutes and 22 seconds to render the entire image. Alright, so I'm going to close this now, and I'm going to open it up in Lightroom, and let's see what we have. So import it. And I'm going to go to the stitch file and import that. I'm going to develop module, and this is a 16,000 pixels by 10,000 pixels across. Alright, so I'm going to zoom into 100%. I'm going to look at the horizon. There's a slight stitch error over there. Nothing too much to be worried about. When you zoom out all the way, you can't really see it. Anyway, first I'm going to crop it down to the size, the aspect ratio that I like. In this case it's 2:1. I'm going to keep the horizon roughly in the middle of the image. And that looks about right. Alright. So same thing with the color balance. I'm going to readjust the color balance right now to get the tones that I like. So in this case it looks a bit too yellow to me. I'm going to put it a bit, turn it down a little bit, cool it off a little bit, and I'm going to up the magenta slightly. Alright, that looks a bit better. So this section of the image here is way too bright, obviously. I'm going to turn down the highlights. I'm going to up the shadows a little bit and boost it with some clarity. Alright. Again, I'm going to adjust the tone curve, contrast curve, and that looks alright to me. And it's looking alright now. So I'm going to put a graduated filter from the top of the image to about right there. And I'm going to add some contrast to the sky and reduce the highlights a little bit. Alright, it looks okay. And color balance still not totally right as I like it. Slightly more pinkish. That's about right. So I'm going to put a slight vignette to it as well. Just sort of emphasizes the middle of the photo. And we'll turn the feather up and the roundness as well. So you can see it sort of darkens the outer sides of the image. Going to increase the white point a bit more, and there we go, and I'll turn up the blacks by a little bit as well. Raise the black point of the image. Alright, so this side of the image looks a bit too saturated for me, a bit too yellow, so I'll just go to the HSL and reduce the saturation of yellows and oranges. Looks a bit better. Alright, so this is probably most of what I'm going to do in Lightroom. I'm going to boost that slightly a bit more. And I'm going to add some noise reduction to it. roughly about plus 20 or so. And the main part of it is the color noise that we have to worry about. So raise color noise reduction to about plus 40 and put the smoothness all the way to 100. Alright. So the image is looking pretty good to me already. But there's another phase that I like to do, and that is the Photoshop phase, where I'm going to boost the colors and emphasize the transitions from dark to lights. Yeah, I'm just keep playing around with the color balance because I'm quite indecisive about that kind of stuff, and I like to just keep tweaking it till I find that balance that I'm happy with. Alright, so we're going to keep it there. Alright, so right click, I'm going to edit this in Photoshop. So I'm going to edit it with the Lightroom adjustments. Alright, so this is the same image in Photoshop now. First up, what I'm going to do is duplicate the layer 3 times, or twice, so I have 3 copies to work with. I'm going to work on the top layer. So first, what I like to do is do some dust and scratch noise correction. And this just removes the smaller stars, and we're going to only be working with the bigger stars. So about 3 pixels across is what I normally put it at. Let it process for a moment. Alright, so if we zoom in, only the larger stars are visible right now. And we're going to the adjustments, and we'll change this to a black and white layer. I'm going to adjust each channel and reduce the reds, reduce the yellows, I'm going to up the blues, and up the magentas. Alright. Go back to adjustments, and I'm going to put a curves layer, a curves mask. Put an anchor point in the shadows and raise up the highlights till it's practically clipping. And that looks about right. Alright, so I'm going to group all those layers together, and I'm going to blend it in with the base layer. So normally I put it about 10%, and that just gives a boost between the blacks and the whites, so the darks and the lights. So this is off, this is on, this is off, this is on. It's a very subtle effect, but just gives the image a slight boost. Alright, I'm going to hide that layer first. I'm going to work on the middle layer, and this would be our vibrance and saturation layer. So same thing, I'm going to go to dust, noise correction with dust and scratches. This time I'm going to put the pixel size to be much bigger, put it about 7, and this practically gets rid of all the visible stars. And we're just dealing with the shapes of the image. So only the larger stars are visible right now, and everything looks a bit slightly blurred out. But in this case, it's not blurred enough. So I'm going to filter again. I'm going to put a blur, a Gaussian blur. And same thing at about 7 pixels, what I worked out to be the best for this size of image. And now the entire image looks a bit blurry. Don't worry about that, that's what we want. Again, we'll go to the adjustments layer, and I'm going to put a curves for it, anchor point in the shadows, and the same thing. I'm going to boost the highlights all the way till it starts clipping and just a roll off at the top. Go back to the adjustments. I'm going to add a lot of vibrance, quite a lot of saturation as well, and yep, that looks alright to me. I'm going to group these layers together, and I'm going to blend it in about 15 to 20%. Alright, So this is off, this is on, off, and on. So it just gives the entire image a nice vibrance boost. Same thing, I'm going to add back the black and white layer, and it gives the entire image a good transition between darks and the lights. So now what we can do is just fine tune the opacity of each layer that we want. In this case, I feel we should have, it should be a bit more vibrant. So I'm going to put it 20%. Alright, this is off, and this is both on. Alright, off, and on. Alright, gonna merge these layers together, all three of them. And we're going to close it, and we'll go back into Lightroom. We'll save it. Alright, so this is our image that just came up from Photoshop. So the ground is looking slightly too dark to me now. I'm going to raise the shadows up by a little bit more. And the highlights down a little bit. Now I'm going to crop it to the exact crop that I like. Fuse a bit too wide. And I'm going to add a final vignette to it. Darken the corners slightly more. Lots of feather. And adjust the roundness. And I'm going to do a final tweak to the color balance. Add some magenta there. And cool the image down a little bit more. And there we have the final image. So I'm going to export that as a, so this depends on what you want to export it for. If it's for print, you want to keep it at JPEG quality with a ProPhoto RGB color space. But in this case, since we're doing it for the web, I'm going to go down to sRGB. I'm going to resize it to 4K at 72 dpi. And I'm going to do a mild sharpening for screens. And of course, at the end, chuck in your watermark. And once that is exported, we have the final image. So that's my processing workflow from start to end. Hope you like it. Any questions, leave it in the comments or message me. Alright, anyway, this is Paean from Astrordinary Imaging, signing off.